Good evening, everybody. Doug Cox, I'm the chairman of the Menominee Tribe. It's good to have everybody here. So we're honored to serve tonight for the host for Mark Charles, President Candidate's Meet and Greet event. I'd like to take the opportunity to express my sincere thanks to Mark Charles and his campaign on behalf of our tribe. Thank you for choosing the Menominee Nation for bringing your important political, presidential campaign and issues to our tribal lands. Mark Charles is a tribal citizen of the Navajo Nation. He is running for the President of the United States in the 2020 election. Mark's campaign for the office of President of the United States as an independent candidate. You'll hear more about that when he speaks for himself on that. It's a historical moment for tribes and for Native Americans. It comes as a great time for the Native American people with the election of folks like Sharice Davids, Deb Haaland. They're the first women elected to Congress, and in this time of change and great successes we're having, it's a great time to build off of those successes. So Mark's vision is to build a nation where we the people truly means we the people. He says we the people have never meant all the people. He feels it's time for the inclusion. He says it's time for we the people to truly mean that in itself. Mark is a Native American activist, a public speaker, a consultant on Native American issues, a journalist, a blogger, a pastor, and a computer programmer. Things I didn't know until today. So I've had the honor to meet Mark. I met him in August at the Frank Lemire Native American Presidential Forum in Sioux City. And along with 10 other candidates, Mark to me was clearly the leader on our Native voice. Only that, on the understanding of Native issues and standing strong for Native leadership. So tonight you'll hear directly from presidential candidate Mark Charles. I say Wawanan to our Navajo relative. Wawanan means thank you in their Menominee language, for choosing to run and for your dedication on the issues important to us, nations and tribes. We're happy to have you here. We hope you enjoy your time among us, and we, the Menominee Nation, wish you a great and successful campaign and candidacy. Thank you for the meet and greet and your presence here tonight. So I say thank you, Wawanan. Everybody, Mark Charles.
Oyat Mark Charles in the Shia, Sin Beke Dinan Nishlim, the Tohini Basichin, Sin Beke Dinan Basiche, the Tohini Dashanel. In our Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our 4 clans. We're a matrilineal people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. Now, my mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, and so I say Sin Beke Dinan Nishlim. Translated, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Sinbakegina. Then my fourth clan, my father's father, is Totochitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. Wherever I go around the country, I always try to acknowledge the people whose land I'm on. And what I've been privileged to experience more and more throughout my campaign is not just acknowledging the people whose land I'm on, but being welcomed by the actual indigenous hosts of the land. And so as we drove around today and I heard about some of the Menominee creation story and how that took place here around these very rivers and around these very mountains, and then to be welcomed by the leader of the Menominee people and have members of the Menominee Nation in front of me is deeply, deeply meaningful to me. So thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for hosting me here. Thank you for giving me a tour of your lands, and thank you for giving me the honor to speak to you. About 15 years ago, I moved with my family from Denver, Colorado back to New Mexico, or back to Arizona. I had been pastoring a church in Denver for 2 years, and my church, which was comprised primarily of Native American peoples, it was called the Christian Indian Center in Denver, was wrestling with the issue of contextualizing worship. What does it mean to be Native and be Christian? What does it mean to use our own language and culture and understanding of what is sacred in our worship? Now, most of our Native peoples are boarding school survivors who, especially in the church, and the message that most of our peoples received was to become a Christian, you first had to become American, which means you had to give up your language and give up your culture and give up your understanding of what was sacred. I'm not going to go deeply into that journey right now, but that is the journey that led me back to the reservation. And I grew up in a border town, in a mission compound off the reservation run by the Christian Reformed Church, which is a Dutch denomination. And I often tell people I grew up in a Dutch ghetto just off the reservation. And so I had all the Dutch culture around me, with the oliebollen and all this other stuff, but I also had my Navajo grandparents living on campus with me, some other clan members living on campus with us too, and then of course the reservation was just across the road, and so we'd go to the reservation frequently. And so I grew up in a Dutch ghetto, but also surrounded by my Navajo culture. And so I realized as I was engaging in conversations about this history and about worship and about these deep injustices and historical traumas that was experienced by many of our peoples, I realized if I was really going to have a voice of leadership in this dialogue, I had to go back to the Navajo Nation and live on our reservation. And so I moved back to the Navajo reservation, and some members of our church, they had a hogan, which was 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road. There was no running water, no electricity. It was a 25-foot diameter building, log walls, dirt floor, no running water, no electricity in that entire community. That wasn't the hardest thing about living there. We adjusted fairly quickly to hauling water, to cooking over a campfire, over a camp stove. We adjusted fairly quickly to using the outhouse. We adjusted fairly quickly to life off the grid. But what was the hardest thing for us was once we moved there, we felt like we had kind of dropped off the face of the earth. We quickly learned that there's very few non-natives who go to Indian reservations. And those who do come mostly come to take our picture or to give us charity. And very few actually want to really get to know us as people. So as I was there and experiencing this, I began to get very angry. I actually began to get very insecure. And this was a very challenging thing because I didn't know where these insecurities were coming from, and I didn't know where this anger was coming from. And I would try to talk to my friends about it, my non-native friends, over the phone, because again, they weren't coming to the reservation. And every time we would talk about this history and this situation, I could feel my anger rising. But then soon my friends' defenses would go up, and they'd say things like, well, we didn't do that to your people. It wasn't my family that did those things. And soon they would hang up the phone because they were so ready to start screaming at me. And I didn't know how to talk about the history. I didn't know how to be honest with what I was feeling. I was observing the historical trauma of my community. I was feeling the deep marginalization from society. I was beginning to understand some of the history. I was dealing with insecurity and anger. And I said to my wife one day as I was sitting there, wrestling with all these emotions and having all this pent-up emotion inside of me, I said to my wife, I finally understand why so many of my people drink. And one day I was sitting down and I was writing a letter for like the 10th time trying to get my friends to understand how I felt. And in this letter I wrote and I said, being Native American and living on these lands, our own land, in the middle of this nation, the United States of America, it feels like our Native communities are this old grandmother who has a very large and a very beautiful house. And years ago, some people came into our house and they locked us upstairs in the bedroom violently. Today, our house is full of people. They're sitting on our furniture, they're eating our food. They've come in, they're having a party inside our house. Now they've since come upstairs and they've unlocked the door to our bedroom, but it's much later and we're tired, we're old, we're weak, we're sick, and so we can't or we don't come out. But the thing that hurts us the most and that causes us the most pain is that virtually nobody from this party ever comes upstairs, seeks out the grandmother in the bedroom, sits down next to her on the bed, takes her hand, and simply says, "Thank you. Thank you for letting us be in your house." I wrote that and I'm like, that's it. That's exactly what I'm feeling. I started sharing that with my non-native friends. And they would hear that metaphor and they would say, what does it mean to say thank you? How does my family, my community, my church, my town, my state, even my nation express gratitude to the indigenous people of this land? Well, see, now we're having a very different conversation. Now, instead of talking about victim and oppressor, about weak and strong, now we are talking about what I would say is the heart of the problem, which is this reversal of roles. I was out herding sheep one day with one of our neighbors on the sheep camp. He's a boarding school survivor. He speaks better Navajo than English, lived on the reservation almost his entire life. This is 2004, 2005. We're walking through the fields herding sheep. The whole nation, President Bush is in office. He's just introduced a dialogue on immigration reform. And we're walking through the fields, and I said to my friend, I said, the whole nation is talking about immigration reform. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? He said, well, there's already so many of them here, maybe we shouldn't worry about borders anymore. Now, if you're anywhere else in the country, you're assuming he's talking about the 14 million undocumented who've come over the southern border. But because we're both native, because we're on a reservation, because he's a boarding school survivor, you have to at least pause and ask and say, is he talking about the 14 million who have come over the southern border in the past 20 years, or the 300 million, most of who have poured over from Europe over the past 500 years? And I love the ambiguity so much I didn't even ask him to clarify. I just left it there. And I began telling people, without native peoples at the table, without the indigenous host of Turtle Island in the conversation, the United States of America is incapable of comprehensively and justly reforming immigration law. Without natives at the table, all you have is one generation of undocumented immigrants trying to figure out what to do with another generation of undocumented immigrants, and there's no integrity in the dialogue. This is the challenge that we're facing. We have this nation of 300 million people who've left their lands, they've left their homes, they've left their families, they've left their creation stories, they've left everything they've known and understood, and most of them, except for the situation of the slaves who were brought here, most of them came here seeking some sort of form of prosperity. They've never asked for, nor have they ever been given permission to be here. Meanwhile, we have 6 million indigenous people native to these lands. Our creation stories take place here. They tell us why that mountain sits over there. They tell us why this river flows over here. And these stories encourage, even demand us to live here sustainably. The challenge we're facing as a nation is we have this reversal of roles. We have these 300 million people running around acting like they own the place. And we have 6 million indigenous peoples to these lands being treated like unwanted guests in someone else's house. This is the problem we're facing. The reason that this undocumented immigration began happening is because of this thing called the doctrine of discovery. I spent the last decade of my life studying the doctrine of discovery. I just published a book on it called Unsettling Truths. The doctrine of discovery, it's a series of papal bulls, edicts of the Catholic Church. The first one's written in 1452, the last one's written in 1493. It says things like invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and to their use and profit. It's essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever land you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are less than human and their lands are yours to take. This is literally the doctrine that let European nations go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the people because they did not see them as human. It's the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world, which was already inhabited by millions and claimed to have discovered it. You can't discover lands already inhabited. It's called stealing. The fact that to this day this nation honors Columbus as the discoverer of America reveals the bias, which is that native peoples, people of color, aren't fully human. Now this doctrine gets embedded into the foundations of the country. So in 1763, King George draws a line down the Appalachian Mountains and he says to the colonies who are here that they no longer have the right of discovery of these empty Indian lands west of Appalachia. This upsets the colonists. They want access to those lands. So a few years later, they write a letter of protest. In their letter, they accuse the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They go on in the letter to say that he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. They signed their letter on July 4th, 1776. Literally 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. Making it very clear the only reason the Founding Fathers used this inclusive term all men because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. The Declaration of Independence is a blatantly white supremacist document that dehumanizes Native peoples. The Constitution, which begins with the words, "we the people," sounds inclusive, right? Sounds like, hey, this is us. Well, Article 1, Section 2, which is just a few lines later, this is the section of the Constitution that determines who is and who is not a part of the Union, who is and who is not covered by this document. If you read this document, Article 1, Section 2, the first thing you have to note is it never mentions women. Now, this is important because if you read our entire Constitution from the preamble down to the 27th Amendment, you will find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns. 51 he, him, and his. Who can run for office, who can hold office, even who's protected by the document. There's not a single female pronoun in the entire Constitution. So we have to know Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women. Second, it specifically excludes natives. And third, it counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So who's left? Well, white landowning men is who could vote. See, we don't think about this very often, but the problem our nation faces, the challenges we have in front of us come from these dehumanizing documents. So today, one of the crises that we're facing in Indian country is what? Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, correct? Thousands of our women and girls have gone missing, and society has responded with a shrug. I was at the Franklin Muir Presidential Forum. All of these candidates, when they heard about this crisis, they said, we need to write new laws. We need to have new policies. When I took the stage, I said, a new law isn't going to fix the problem. A new policy isn't going to fix the problem. When you have a Declaration of Independence that refers to natives as savages and a Constitution that never mentions women, nobody should be surprised when your Indigenous women go missing or get murdered and society doesn't care. We don't need a new law, we need a new basis for our laws. Our law is based on what? The Constitution. Our values come from where? The Declaration of Independence.
when those things dehumanize Native peoples, this is why our Native women go missing or get murdered, and society doesn't respond. And no one at that forum was willing to take it down to the heart of the problem. Nobody was able to bring it back. See, this is the challenge we face. The nation would rather believe that the United States of America is racist and sexist and white supremacist in spite of our foundations. But the truth of the matter is, we're racist and sexist and white supremacists because of our foundations. This is what they state. This is what they say. And we have to find a way to deal with that. We have to find a way to wrestle with that. In 1823, there was a Supreme Court case. It's Johnson versus McIntosh. It's two white men of European descent. They're in court litigating over a single piece of land. One of them got the land from a native tribe. The other one claimed to have gotten the same land from the government, and they want to know who owned it. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. They ruled, this is the John Marshall Court. John Marshall is considered one of the greatest Supreme Court jurists of U.S. history. He wrote in an opinion that the principle for land titles is that discovery gives title to the land. And then he goes on to reference the doctrine of discovery and states that even though natives were here first, but because we are savages, we only have what's called the right of occupancy to the land, like a fish occupies water or a bird occupies air, and Europeans have the fee title to the land, the right of discovery to the land, therefore they are the true title holders. In late 1990s, the United Indian Nation came back and they repurchased some of their traditional lands in Central State New York. They bought them on the open market, paid full price for them. And they wanted to reclaim some of their traditional sovereignty over these lands. Well, the lands they purchased were within the city limits of the city of Sherrill, and the city of Sherrill wanted the tax revenue from those lands, and so they sued the United Indian Nation in federal district court. The federal court ruled in favor of the United Indian Nation, and so the city of Sherrill appealed to the Court of Appeals, and the decision was upheld. So they appealed the second time to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court heard the case in the early 2000s, and in 2005 they issued their opinion. In the first footnote of the case, they referenced the doctrine of discovery by name. And then they went on to reverse the decision of the lower courts. In 2005, the Supreme Court argued that, moreover, the lands now in question have greatly increased in value since the United sold them 250 years ago, as they've been converted from wilderness to become parts of a city like Sherrill. They're using the exact same argument, just not using the word savages. And so they conclude that, based on the standard of federal Indian law, which footnote 1, doctrine of discovery, and federal equity practice, we conclude that the United Indian Nation cannot rekindle embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold. This opinion was written and delivered by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the liberal, progressive voices of dissent on a very conservative Supreme Court. Even in the past 2 years, we've had Hollywood films come out about her. We've had documentaries released about her. This mythology that she is this person fighting for the rights of the marginalized. Now, there's no doubt she has done an amazing job of fighting for the rights of women and bringing many of the issues that women are marginalized to the surface. But in regards to Native peoples, not only did she vote and side with the conservative court, but she wrote the opinion. Why? Because when your land titles are based on a dehumanizing doctrine of discovery, white supremacy becomes a bipartisan value. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, left or right. If your land titles are based on the legal opinion that natives are savages and do not have rights to their land, if you want to uphold your land rights, you have to legally conclude again, even in 2005, that natives are still savages. In fact, when I was at the Franklin River Presidential Forum, this native woman, Marcella LeBeau, was asking every candidate about what's called the Remove the Stain Act. See, because that Wounded Knee, where 350 Dakota men, women, and children were slaughtered in a single day, the U.S. Army awarded 20 Congressional Medals of Honor to the U.S. soldiers who participated in this massacre. And Marcella LeBeau was asking each candidate what they thought and would they support this bill to rescind these medals. If you go on to the Army's record books and you look up Medals of Honor, you can look them up by war and by conflict. And if you look up the Medals of Honor for the Indian War campaigns, you will find that between 1839 and 1898, the United States Army awarded 425 Medals of Honor for soldiers who fought in the Indian War campaigns. During this century, not only were 30 states added to the Union, but during this century, the U.S. population of non-native peoples skyrocketed from 5 million to 76 million. And the native population plummeted from 600,000 to 237,000. So we have to just be clear. In the 19th century, the United States Congress awards 425 Medals of Honor for the ethnic cleansing and genocide of native peoples. And not only that, if you look at our history, in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed what's called the Pacific Railway Act. This is the act that gives the land and the resources to complete the Transcontinental Railway. That railway had reached Omaha, Nebraska, and this bill provided the land and the resources to get it from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, within 3 years of signing that act, after the Dakota War of 1862, after the hanging of the Dakota 38, in January of 1863, Abraham Lincoln nullified the treaties of all the tribes in Minnesota, or in February, and then in March, he signed another bill that allowed him to remove them without negotiation or treaty. That removal began in April. The Dakota people were put onto barges, onto boats, onto wagons, onto trains, and shipped out of Minnesota into the Dakota Territory. They were put onto a reservation that wasn't sustainable for their lives. In 1864, the Cheyenne and Arapaho were on treaty land that they had signed with the U.S. government in Colorado. And a Methodist pastor came over, was leading a U.S. Army. They came over the hill. The Cheyenne and Arapaho were waving a white flag of surrender and an American flag to show that they're peacefully, and he ordered all of them slaughtered. It was later reported that the soldiers paraded the genitalia of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people down the streets of Denver. And also in '64, Abraham Lincoln signed a bill that created Bosque Redondo, which was the death camp that the Navajo, my people, were marched to during the Long Walk. 10,000 of our people were rounded up in New Mexico and Arizona, marched down to Fort Sumner, held on a camp there. Hundreds of our people died of exposure and starvation along the way. Kit Carson was ordered by General Carlson to have a scorched earth campaign, destroying our crops, killing our animals, burning our homes, and killing any Navajo he found on sight. They rounded us up, took us down to Bush Redondo. A quarter of our people died while imprisoned in this death camp. If you look at the map of the Transcontinental Railway, there were 3 primary routes that were scheduled to be built. The first one went from Omaha, Nebraska, through Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, and comes out near San Francisco, California. There's another route that starts in Duluth, Minnesota, goes through Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, and comes out near Seattle. There's a southern route that goes through the Territory of New Mexico, Arizona, and comes out near Los Angeles. Within 2.5 years of signing the Pacific Railway Act, Abraham Lincoln has literally ethnically cleansed the tribes from Minnesota, Colorado, and New Mexico to make way for the Transcontinental Railway, making him literally one of the most genocidal and ethnic cleansing presidents in the US history. When you understand this history, you understand that this is not just about a few words of savages in the Declaration of Independence, or the exclusion of a few people from the Constitution. When you understand that this doctrine of discovery is the dehumanizing basis for land titles and helps establish this notion's sense of manifest destiny over this entire continent, you begin to realize that this dehumanizing foundation is literally what led to genocide of Native nations and Native peoples. And our nation doesn't know how to talk about these things. It doesn't know how to deal with its history. It doesn't know how to deal with its past. There is a reason why presidential candidates do not come to the Native nations. It's because they would have to answer questions about this kind of history, and they don't know how to answer those questions. The purpose of the Constitution, the reason we have a Constitution that excludes natives, excludes women, and counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So who is left? White, landowning men. This is why we have a Constitution. The Constitution exists to protect the interests of white landowning men. So today, women earn 70 to 80 cents to the dollar, and we act shocked about that. This shouldn't shock us. The Constitution is working. We get upset that our prisons are filled with people of color. This shouldn't shock us. The Constitution's working. People get mad that in 2010, the Supreme Court sided with Citizens United and rules that corporations now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals. This is what opens the door for super PACs, unlimited support of candidates. This shouldn't shock us. Who runs corporations? White landowning men. The Constitution is protecting the exact demographic it's supposed to. This is the challenge. And in our politics, everything runs through the white landowning male. So when these progressive candidates make their announcements, where's the first place they run off to? Iowa and New Hampshire, right? Iowa is the 5th whitest state in the country, New Hampshire is the 3rd. They both have higher than average rates of land ownership. So they announce their progressive platforms and they run off to sell them and get the support of, raise money from, and get the vote of who? White landowning men. And ultimately, that demographic is never going to support something that is about deconstructing them. And so the whole thing they're doing, these candidates, is learning how to soften their positions so they're palatable to white landowning men. Now, my entire campaign is not about oppressing white landowning men. It's not about just making them experience what our people have experienced. My campaign is about decentering white landowning men. Taking them out of the center and moving them to the margins where the rest of us exist. Now that's going to feel oppressive to them because they're used to being in the center, but it's not. It's just treating them as equal, just like the rest of us. And so my strategy for my campaign is about decentering this demographic. And it's about actually addressing the foundations of our country. So in his final State of the Union, President Obama, he was talking about the need in our nation for a new politics. And he said, he quoted the Constitution, he said, "We the people." Our Constitution begins with these three simple words. Words we've come to recognize mean all the people. Now that sounds beautiful, right? But I was like, when? When did we decide this? When did we decide we the people meant all the people? The Founding Fathers didn't mean that. Abraham Lincoln didn't believe it. As good as the Civil Rights Movement didn't get us there, President Trump doesn't believe we the people means all the people. The challenge is we've never decided as a nation that we the people actually means all the people. And so because we've never made that decision, and because we've never decentered white landowning men, and because everything in politics is about running through white landowning men, what we have is what happened in 2016. I want to break down the 2016 election for you. So Donald Trump won that election by telling his supporters what? What was he going to do? Make America great again. Correct? Hillary Clinton responded by saying what? Well, she said America's great already. In fact, in the general election debates, Hillary Clinton went on and expanded and said, not only is America great already, she said America is great because America is good. Donald Trump stopped. He looked at her and he said, I agree with her. I agree with everything she just said. At the Democratic National Convention, President Obama jumps into the fray and says America is great already. And Cory Booker, 2016, he's a rising star in Democratic politics. He's on the main stage, he's endorsing Hillary Clinton. And in his speech, he acknowledges that the Declaration calls natives savages. He acknowledges that the Constitution never mentions women. And he acknowledges the Three-Fifths Compromise, which is incredibly courageous. Most politicians at his level don't acknowledge any of those things. He acknowledged all three. But he ended that section of his speech by telling his audience, the Democratic Party, but these things do not detract from our nation's greatness. I'm like, really? I think they do. I think that systemic racism and sexism in our foundations do detract from our nation's greatness. Why would he say that? Would he ever say that in a room full of black people, ancestors of slaves? Would he ever say that in a room like this filled with native people? No. Why does he say that? Because to get the support, the money, and the vote of white landowning men, you have to tell them how exceptional they are. You have to tell them they're exceptional. See, we were duped in 2016. We thought the election was about racism versus anti-racism, equality versus inequality. But if Donald Trump is saying make America great again, and Hillary Clinton is saying America's great already, if our former president's jumping in and saying America's already pretty great, and our rising African-American political star is saying the sexism and racism in our foundations don't detract from our nation's greatness, what are they saying? They're both saying our past, our history, our foundations, which exclude people of color, which exclude women, which includes slavery, includes the ethnic cleansing and genocide of native peoples, they both agree those things were great. They disagreed if we were great in 2016. Donald said no and Hillary said yes. See, we thought we were talking about racism versus anti-racism, equality versus inequality. We weren't. What we were talking about was, do we want Donald Trump to make us explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist again? Or do we want Hillary Clinton to work to keep our white supremacy and racism implicit? Remember, when you live in a nation whose land titles are based on a dehumanizing doctrine of discovery, white supremacy becomes a bipartisan value. And when all of your candidates are in this political system that is centered around white landowning men, financed by, supported by, run through the white landowning male, everything is about keeping that system in place. So maybe you're asking Mr. Charles, you've done a good job of convincing us this system is broken. Why are you running then? What chance do you possibly have of running? Well, I'm running for several reasons, one of which is to bring this dialogue to a national level. So how do we actually win? A lot of people will say, Mr. Charles, you have a great message. It sounds beautiful to build a nation where we the people truly means all the people. But how are you ever going to get there? I've been accused multiple times of running a protest campaign. In 2016, Bernie Sanders, who was a true independent, wanted to get our nation to talk about something, which was economic inequality. And even though he is an independent, he ran as a Democrat. Why would he do that? Anyone who knew anything about politics in 2016 knew 2016 was Hillary Clinton's year. She was beat by President Obama in 2008. She sat out 2012 so he could run uncontested. 2016 was her year. She was chosen already before the primaries even began. The superdelegates were already lined up behind her. That was her year. Bernie Sanders ran as a Democrat, not because he wanted to win, but because he wanted to change the conversation. He wanted to raise more money, get into the debates, and have the nation talk about systemic economic inequality. And he did that. But he lost because he ran as a Democrat. And the Democrats had already chosen Hillary. So if I was running a protest campaign, if I merely want our nation to talk about this history, I wouldn't be here to you in front of you today as an independent. I would be here as a Democrat. I would probably raise a lot more money. I would have been in the debates, and I would have got the nation talking about these things long ago. But just like Bernie Sanders, I would never be nominated. It wouldn't happen. So the proof that I'm not running a protest campaign is that I'm running as an independent. Running as an independent is the hardest path to the presidency, but it's the only path that actually lets me get there. That's why I'm here before you today. I'm running as an independent. One of the core values of my campaign is that if you want to govern these lands known as Turtle Island, if you want to have leadership, provide leadership in these lands, the most appropriate and respectful place to begin your campaign is not in Iowa or New Hampshire to white landowning men. It's talking to the indigenous nations of Turtle Island. And so for the past 4 months, since I made my announcement, I have been traveling Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, South Dakota, Iowa, Oregon, Minnesota, Wisconsin, talking directly to people like yourselves in rooms just like this. Talking with Native leaders, talking with Native elders, talking with Native community members, laying out my vision. Talking about the things that I want to do as a nation. How I want to build a nation where we the people truly means all the people, because I want your input first. This is the most respectful and appropriate place to begin this conversation, is with the indigenous hosts of Turtle Island. Now, if you run as an independent, you have to get on the ballot in all 50 states. And there's a signature requirement in each state to get on the ballot. And so a few months ago, I had my research team look up the numbers of signatures required in all 50 states for the 2016 election, because they're just coming out for 2020 right now. I had them look at the signature requirements in all 50 states. And then I had them compare that to the census data of 2010 and the number of natives over the age of 18 in all 50 states. In every state, the number of natives over the age of 18 exceeds the number of signatures required. meaning Native America alone has the power to put me on the ballot in all 50 states. But that doesn't get me elected. Now, my campaign of building a nation where we the people truly means all the people is very appealing to other people of color, to women, to members of the LGBTQ community, to people from different religions. Anyone who at some point in their life has realized we the people doesn't include them. Now that demographic is very broad and is big enough to bring my campaign to the national level. But it still doesn't put me in the White House. The group that puts me in the White House is millennials. Millennials are the largest voting bloc in the country. They outnumber boomers. They're the largest voting bloc in the country. And millennials have been screwed by the system. They were told, go to college, get a good education, you'll get a good job. They went to college. While they were in college, we changed the system on them. We jacked up prices and changed lending, and so they came out of college with tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And there's no jobs. They're teaching adjunct at some community college for $350 a class. They're drowning in debt. On top of that, with the last tax reform bill, we just piled another $1 trillion worth of debt onto them. Millennials know the system is not working. There are just as many white millennials as millennials of color drowning in debt. And they know the system isn't working, and they are ready for systemic change. And so there is a part of my message that is very, very appealing to millennials. And on top of that, the reason they're not part of the political base yet is because they don't own anything. All they have is debt. They don't own houses, they don't own land, they don't own stocks. They're in debt. So the other parties are ignoring them because they don't have any money. I'm appealing to millennials. So my other system is dependent on Gen Z. Gen Z are 20 years and younger. Gen Z does not know the world without high-speed internet. Right? Their entire lives, smartphones have been in existence. And so social networking and media is secondhand to them. It's the air they breathe. After the Parkland shooting, who organized the largest rally in Washington, D.C. in the history of the country? Gen Z. Who just called for a global climate strike and organized strikes and cities, not just across the country, but around the world? Who did that? Gen Z. They didn't buy advertising on ABC, NBC, CBS. They didn't run ads in New York Times and Fox News. They have their own networks that they do. And if millennials understand they're being screwed financially, economically, Gen Z understands they're being screwed environmentally. And they are demanding to have a voice in this message now. And so Gen Z is also very open to systemic change. So if we have natives have the power to put me on the ballot, marginalized community can raise my message to the national level, Gen Z can amplify it around the country without using traditional media, and millennials can put me over the hump to get enough votes. We actually have a strategy not just to change the dialogue, but to actually put me into office. We have some deep, bipartisan, systemic issues we need to deal with. And I'm traveling around the country raising these issues and talking about these things and saying we have to deal with this at a systemic level. And we have a window where we can actually do it. And we have a message that we can actually do it. The goal of my campaign, the work that I want to do, the nation I want to see our nation become, is a nation where we the people, for the very first time, truly means all the people. Means you, all of us are included, have a voice, have a say, have a space in this nation. The founding fathers never envisioned that. Abraham Lincoln didn't have that kind of vision. But this is the vision that I want us to have as a nation. As the world gets smaller through technology, as the world becomes more diverse through interracial marriage, as we have a greater gap between economics, we need to find a way to govern ourselves where every voice can be heard, where everybody can have input, where everyone can be included in the conversation. We have to, if we want to think about our children's, grandchildren's, 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 grandchildren's lives, it's this moment in time where we have to decide, do we want to be a nation where we the people truly means all the people? And that's what my campaign is about. That's what I'm fighting for. And that's what I'm working, that's what my strategy is to get us to the White House so we can actually begin to implement that. I am calling in our nation for a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation that I would put on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that happened in South Africa, in Rwanda, and in Canada. I wouldn't call ours Truth and Reconciliation, though, because reconciliation implies there was a previous harmony, which isn't accurate. I would call ours Truth and Conciliation, and I think we need one sooner rather than later, which is why I'm running today. And so I welcome you to support my campaign. I welcome you to donate to my campaign. I welcome you to sign up and volunteer. I welcome you to share our campaign on social media. I welcome you to ask more questions and to get involved. But I think we have a window of opportunity where we can actually make some systemic changes. And I thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight to hear me speak about this. So thank you very much.